What's up, everybody? Lance Caporossi from 3 Championship Drive. Don't forget to check out the podcast on all podcasting platforms. Going to do this solo real quick and just react to the news surrounding the Detroit Pistons. If you haven't heard, you're living under a rock, and I can't believe you missed the news. But the Detroit Pistons have signed Trajan Langdon as the president of basketball operations. I got to say, I'm ecstatic. Similar to how I was when the Detroit Pistons signed Monty Williams. We all know how that turned out, but I do have much higher expectations for Trajan Langdon. He was considered one of the smarter minds in the Pelicans front office. Plenty of Pelicans fans are sad to see him go. They were hoping that maybe, he would eventually move up at some point. So yeah, I feel like we got a good one though, but being a Pistons fan, you really can't get too excited because we have been hurt in the past by just some of this news, like obviously Monty Williams, and we all love Troy Weaver when he was first brought in, and we know how that has turned out. So hopefully Trajan Langdon can make things happen. I do want to clear some stuff up though when it comes to his drafts that he has been a part of, because I was reading someone, I believe it's Google AI, like if you type in drafts he's been a part of, they say he was with the Spurs from 2009. I believe Trajan Langdon was still playing professional basketball, I believe over in Moscow during that time. He was actually the scout. He was a scout with the San Antonio Spurs from 2012 to 2015. And the drafts he were a part of, 2012, 2013, 2014, I believe the 2015 draft. In the Spurs, they really didn't have very many players that really stand out. The guys are Marcus Denman, Livio, Jean Charles, Deshaun Thomas, Kyle Anderson, Jordan McRae, Corey Jefferson, Nikola Milutinov, and then Cody Lulane. Those are the guys drafted while he was a scout with the San Antonio Spurs. Now with the Brooklyn Nets, he was the assistant GM of 2016 to, I believe, May of 2019. So he was part of the 16 draft, the 17 draft, and the 18 draft. In 2016, they traded their pick. It was Marcus Page. In 2017, they drafted Jared Allen, Alexander Vesnikov. And then 2018, it was Dazin Musa, and then Rodihan Kurucs. And then he was signed by New Orleans in May of 2019. Now, you can also throw Karis LeVert in there, too. He was part of his tenure when he was coming in. And then they did draft Nick Claxton in 2019. So I'm sure whatever information he had on those draft picks, I'm pretty sure the Nets used it. So we'll just give him credit for Nick Claxton as well. Because, I mean, again, we're talking this guy up. We got to talk this guy up. So then with New Orleans, this is when he became the GM. This was in May of 2019. Zion Williamson, Kyra Lewis, Herb Jones in the second round. That's huge. Then there was Dyson Daniels, E.J. Liddell, Carlo Matkovic, and then Jordan Hawkins. You can also give him credit for Trey Murphy, who was brought in with a trade. And then a lot of fans also give him credit for bringing in Jose Alvarado and Najee Marshall, who we've talked about on this podcast before. So you can say, like, I love that Trajan Langdon has been a scout. Like, you can tell that, I mean, you can't really tell, but, his fingerprints were all over these drafts. And I have to imagine that maybe he didn't have the loudest voice in the draft room when this was going on, but, his knowledge, his expertise was used to bring in some of these guys. So here's what I think happens in Detroit under Trajan Langdon. I'm going to say Troy Weaver's gone. I'm going to say he's fired as the Pistons GM. And I believe Monty Williams stays on as a head coach. Now, one could argue Troy Weaver has been a solid talent evaluator and even better than Trajan Langdon. I mean, we've seen the drafts by Troy Weaver, and he, his fingerprints are all over those drafts. Those are his decisions. But outside of drafting Cade and clearing the books, he hasn't been good in the GM. You could argue asset management. He says we're going to build this team up through defense, and then he brings in Joe Harris, the move that I actually did like at the time, but obviously didn't work out. Just things like that. Like, Troy says one thing, he says he's going right, but then he decides to go left. He just has not been a very good GM. Maybe they keep him on as a talent evaluator and a scout. I really am not buying that. I think he is done. I think he's had plenty of time here in Detroit, and it just hasn't been good. And I think you need to clean house. You need to start with the front office. I believe Monty Williams will still be the head coach, even though I would rather see the Detroit Pistons go in a different direction because it felt like Monty Williams gave up on the season, and it looked like he didn't want to be in Detroit at all. Like, you could tell by body language, it just seemed like he was done and like he had just thrown in the white flag. I mean, I guess a 28 game losing streak would do that to you, but I mean, you're going home and you got the largest contract in NBA history for a coach. So, maybe you should have acted like you wanted to be here a little more. But anyway, I believe the Pistons will give him another year with a much improved roster. I understand it was 14, and there are some fans out there saying, why bring back the worst coach? My thing is, I don't believe there were many coaches in the NBA that were going to win with that roster. I mean, Greg Popovich won 22 games over this last season with Wemby. They had Vassell, Keldon Johnson, Sohan, Zach Collins, to name a few players. They only won 22 games, and Victor Wembanyama had arguably the greatest rookie season we've ever seen. So, and Greg Popovich, he's a great coach, but he couldn't even win with that roster, which I think was much better than the Detroit Pistons. So I'm going to just relax a little bit on Monty. I'm going to say he gets another year with a much more improved roster. Now, when it comes to some of these players, there are 3 New Orleans Pelicans that could be on the move. That's Najee Marshall, Brandon Ingram, and Jonas Valanciunas. I believe 2 of these guys will be Detroit Pistons next season. I believe Najee Marshall, because he is looking for a larger role, he would be solid for the Detroit Pistons running the wings with Cade Cunningham. I mean, I think he's almost a guarantee because they have the minutes, they have the money, they can afford to overpay a little bit for him. So I think Najee Marshall is a given for the Detroit Pistons. And then Brandon Ingram and Jonas Valanciunas. You guys know I love Brandon Ingram. I'm not going to say he's a superstar, but he is a one-time All-Star. I think he improves this team. And I really think his numbers would be better, especially his efficiency. And his efficiency wasn't bad at all. But I think his numbers would be better playing with a guard like Cade Cunningham. He hasn't played with a guard like that. Like, he's been asked to do a lot of the playmaking. I think he could really benefit from playing with a guard that's going to set the table for him. That's what you're going to get with Cade Cunningham. But I wouldn't even mind if he brought in all 3 of these guys. If we just want to make it become the Detroit Pelicans, I'm perfectly fine with that because I really like Jonas Valanciunas as well. Like, whether he starts or come off the bench, but he's very solid. He very rarely injured. I think the last 3 seasons, his numbers have been 15 and 10 with like around 2 assists per game. Not a consistent floor spacer, but can hit the 3-pointer. I believe a career average around like 30%, maybe 34. Don't quote me on that, but if you want to drop a comment, feel free. But I like him. He can't play perimeter defense. We know this about him, but he's a solid post defender. So I like Jonas Valanciunas. Again, I'm just guessing that Trajan Langdon will bring in, again, like I said, 2 or 3 of these guys. And I honestly can't wait. Again, I'm ecstatic about this hire. I think he's going to do a great job. I love the draft picks he's been a part of. So there's not much. I can't really say much negative about him. I mean, if I wanted to get into his basketball career in the NBA, yeah, then I guess I could have. But I mean, you go to Wikipedia, you read his resume, um, and he was incredible overseas. So I'm not even gonna say nothing bad about this guy. I love the move. I'm excited for it, and I can't wait to see what kind of moves and what kind of decisions he makes as the Detroit Pistons president of basketball operations. Now, my final thought is I just hope Tom Gores, Arn Tellem, all those guys, they give him they let him be the basketball voice. They let him make these decisions. I don't want any more cooks in the kitchen. Let him be the chef. Let him make the decisions in the kitchen and just leave it up to him. And then swim or sink, this will be on Trajan Langdon. That's what I hope happens in Detroit.